I'd like to show you how to make a massive lead sound using an instrument rack, which I'm just going to drag and drop onto this blank MIDI track that I've got, and a number of Live's analog synthesizer devices. So I'm just going to drag and drop an analog into this blank instrument rack that I've created. I'm going to show the chain list. I'm just going to add, straight off the bat, a couple more analogs in there. So let me just solo this first one. So I've loaded a blank instance of analog. That's what it sounds like when you load it on without actually loading a preset. At the moment, we've only got one oscillator active. Now, the key to getting a really big sound is to layer up multiple oscillators, which is why I've loaded 3 instances of analog into this instrument rack. So that's going to be a total of 6 oscillators, and that's going to give me a really nice big texture. So straight away, let's activate the second oscillator. I'm going to leave them both as sawtooth waveforms. So that's the difference between having 1 and 2 active. And the way to make that slightly bigger, at the moment they are playing the exact same note, and the oscillators are almost stacked on top of one another. But what we can do is detune one oscillator against another, start to blur the edges of the tuning so that you can hear now we're getting that slightly bigger sound. If I just put those back to where they were, and now detune them again, you can hear that they've separated out slightly and it's giving us a bigger sound. Next thing I'm going to do is just adjust the amp envelope so that when I hold my finger down on a key, the note is also held. I'm just going to turn the release time down a little bit. You can either do this graphically here or numerically over here. And to give me an even bigger sound, I'm going to turn this control on called unison and detune. Now you can hear if you go too far, it sounds out of tune really. So somewhere up to 50. Somewhere in that sort of region. I'm just going to attenuate the volume as well, just by a few dB. So if I just deactivate the unison and that second oscillator, that's what we started with. Add the second oscillator, detune them, and then add this unison control. So that is one instance of analog, and we're already starting to get a much bigger sound than we started with. The next one, again, I'm going to activate the second oscillator. Let's go for square waves this time. Slightly different flavour of sound. Detune them slightly, adjust the amp envelope so that it mirrors what we've got going on the first analog. Again, you can add some unison, detune. So that's adding more voices, and the detune again spreads out those voices tuning wise so we can hear the difference between them, and hence we're getting a bigger sound. The other thing that you can do with a square wave, which you can't do with a sawtooth wave, is modulate the pulse width, i.e. the gap between the on and off signal essentially of the square wave. So I'm going to just turn on LFO1 and LFO2. Just listen to this first oscillator for the time being. Pulse width, I'm going to modulate this with the LFO. You can choose the rate of the LFO obviously here. Turn the second oscillator on. This pulse width is modulated by LFO2. So I'll choose a slightly different rate for that. Again, it just has the effect of thickening up the sound. So as the first analog. There's the second analog. And the third analog, again, I'm going to activate both oscillators. I'm going to pitch one down an octave, one up an octave. Again, the amp envelope. So it looks a little bit more like that. And attenuate the volume to roughly the same extent as the other two synthesizers. Now let's hear that combined. Truly massive sound. So I'm going to get a filter effect and just drop that outside of the rack. What I might also need to do is just stick a utility there. This is just for speed. It's probably better just to attenuate the volumes of the analog, each individual analog, or in fact you can do it on the rudimentary mixer that you get inside the instrument rack, but I'm just being lazy, so I'm just going to pull the volume of that down a little bit using the gain control on utility. And there's your truly massive pad sound. Perhaps if you extend out the release time a little bit, you can turn it into more of a pad, or it could be a lead sound. If you pitch it down a little bit, be a nice evil bass sound. Let me just add a bit of reverb to that using return track A. If you wanted to dirty up the sound a little bit, you could add a bit of redux. Reduce the sample rate a little bit, or in fact, reduce the bit depth. In conclusion, the way to get a really big lead sound is to layer up as many analogs as you need to inside an instrument rack. Activate both the oscillators on your analog device. Detune the oscillators against one another, and also add this unison control. Adjust the envelope to suit the type of sound that you're going for. That envelope is probably more suited towards a lead sound, but if you extend the release time out a little bit, it might be more suited to a pad sound, and then apply effects as needed. So I've just added a filter there at the end. So that's how to get your really big lead or pad sounds.